Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait 1 minute while some others join. I can see they're trying to join the room now. We'll wait 1 minute, then we'll get going. I appreciate everybody being here. It'll just be another moment again. We'll post some things on the side if you want to take a look at some other things happening across business of cannabis or see some of the speakers. We'll post that right now. But just give us 1 more minute and we'll start in about 30 seconds. Again, thank you everybody for joining us here today on Business of Cannabis and our retail series. It's presented by Vetrina Group, who you'll hear from, and Leafly, who you'll also hear from later today in different components of the program. We're really excited to get going. Again, we'll do it in about 15 seconds. Just want to get things started. Okay, we'll start it off. Hello and welcome. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Business of Cannabis. Welcome to our fourth retail series of 2020. And this one's very top of mind for many, as we'll talk about 3 emerging contiguous markets, the tri-state area of New York, Connecticut, and the most recent state to start selling legally, New Jersey. Now, for those that don't know, since 2017 through news, insights, video, and podcast series, as well as events like this and events in real life, Business of Cannabis has highlighted the companies, brands, people, and trends driving the cannabis industry. And we look to do that every day with our Cannabis Daily newsletter, our Cannabis Daily show, and with events just like this. As we begin, we wish to acknowledge that this land on which we live and work here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, for thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. This year, our retail series is made possible by 2 incredible partners, Leafly and Vetrina Group. Leafly, for those that don't know, although I think almost everybody does, they are the leading customer acquisition tool for more than 7,800 brands and 4,600 retailers who use Leafly to connect with millions of shoppers every year. You can connect with your cannabis business to an industry-leading audience and start capturing more customers and orders than ever before with the Leafly retail solutions. You'll see that in the link on the side. And also for Vetrina Group, they are the experts in the consumer journey, providing data-driven solutions and working with teams to ensure all clients achieve operational excellence at the cannabis retail level. And it isn't just Leafly and Vetrina Group. We're also able to do programs like this through partnerships. And some of our ongoing partners in Business of Cannabis include CannDelta, Torque and Mains, Cannabis Benchmarks, Gallagher in Canada, Headset, Cannabis at Work, and Alterna Savings Bank. Now, just a little bit of an overview of what our program holds today. First, we're going to connect with Krista Raymer of Vetrina Group to talk about 4 things they think about a lot when they talk about cannabis retail stores and what it takes to get up and running profitably. Then we'll be joined by our expert panel, Lucas McCann, Korin Neff, and Andrew Glassman, as well as Rebecca Warner of Leafly, who'll be moderating the panel to talk about New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York and what's happening in each state. As always, after the main stage component of the event, we'll open up the breakout session so you can go face-to-face with the speakers and presenters, and we'll also open up the one-on-one networking component. We like to call the one-on-one networking, it's sort of like a businessy speed dating. Others like to call it high speed dating because it's cannabis and it goes quickly. So you can see that at the end of the program as well. During the program, you'll see my colleague, Tara McManus. She'll be posting updates in the chat, so will I. So be sure to say hi to her and hi over there on the right-hand side of your screen. So hello, Tara. Now, I'd like to introduce Krista Raymer to the stage. She is with Vetrina Group. They are a longtime partner of Business of Cannabis, but more than that, she has become the foremost expert in cannabis retail in North America. From store setup to merchandising to inventory to staffing and everything in between, it is impossible to find a more knowledgeable team than that at Vetrina Group. We'll give me and her a moment to get back on the stage, and I'll be right back with Krista Raymer. Krista Raymer, welcome back to the retail series. I like doing this every month with you because then I get to learn a lot. And specific to today, we're talking about obviously tri-state cannabis retail. Everybody's sort of in a slightly different timeline, but a year from now, there will be lots of retail opened up, and hopefully some will be wildly successful, some will not be. But I wanted to talk to you because you've been through this a number of times, a number of jurisdictions, about what retailers ought to be thinking about well, pre-day one and then day one and then every day afterwards.
Yeah.
You often talk about sort of the framework, which you look at sort of retail. Talk about some sort of key components you'd be thinking about if you were them.
Yeah, you know what? I think like the environment, what it looks like today, versus what it will look like in a year from now is totally different. And we have a lot of learnings that we can pull from Canada specifically in the way that this has rolled out, and California to a point too. What we want to be able to do is analyze and build the business that is going to be agile and move with us. So if we open a store today for what the market is today, we could be in a really tight position in a year or 2 years from now, which we've watched with both pricing compression as well as density when stores start to cluster in certain communities. So first kind of step is to take a look at a framework and say, how can we analyze and plan for the business? And so we've developed this framework that includes taking a look at inventory first, takes a look at quality of sale first, inventory, people, and marketing. And we do it in this way so that everything compounds on itself. This literally becomes the way that we plan the business when we're thinking about opening a new location or analyzing a business that we need to make a reposition on or pick specific KPIs to measure performance.
Yes. And some of those things sound very familiar because we did a series with you as our expert. We'll link to that as the program rolls on. But let's go through, can we? One on top of the other, because they're going to be compounding. Let's talk about quality of sale, like define what it is and then talk a little bit about it. Yeah.
Quality of sale is really that moment that you have an interaction with your customer and your team in store. So what is the environment that we are creating to enable the best quality of sale that we can? So things that are going to impact the quality of sale when thinking about developing a new store are things like floor plans and layouts, merchandising strategies, and ultimately the brand communication and the way that it shows up physically. This is going to set you into a position where you and your team can interact directly with your customers in a way that gets them the right product at the right time.
I like it. And then when you talk like that, it puts me in store, all these stores that I've been into here and elsewhere, thinking about that interaction and what makes it good and what makes it not as good. And we'll talk a little bit about people in a second, but talk about the next one, which is inventory, which I think we did a whole series on it about inventory and inventory planning and how to think about it and how to measure KPIs. Talk a little bit about inventory, especially, I guess, as new markets roll out where inventory is like
tight, right? Like it's always tight and constricted, and then we'll open up. We've seen the regulatory framework in the tri-state area try and make that as a consideration, as opposed to what we saw when we kind of rolled out in Canada. But inventory is going to be your largest cost center as a retailer, maybe outside of rent. And so what we need to be able to do is plan our cash flow to support the business that we want to be able to generate. Many times retailers have a tendency to overbuy in their opening buy. So we put way too much inventory in store. We actually don't know who exactly the customer is going to be or what their shopping patterns are yet. And so it's this art and science between how much do we invest in, how deep is the assortment, and then how do we make it iterative. So with inventory specifically, we want to think about starting pretty small with the consideration around when we can repurchase and make it iterative. We shouldn't really be getting to a position where we have like our full inventory framework and structure built until about 3 months being in. We've got to listen to where the sales go with an inventory structure. So it's less about like what we both think should be in store and should be more about what the customer wants to see in store. It's ultimately is going to support your cash flow as well as gross margins.
Yes. And I'm going to refer people back to that too, because it was also like how to drill down to know actually what you're selling. And is it, you may be selling this one thing out the door all the time, but if you're not making any money on that one thing all the time, how do you actually, rejigger?
Yeah.
Rejigger. Yeah. That's not the right word, but that sounds right. Talk a
little reposition.
Yeah. In every market that comes online, there is this influx of people that want to be in it, right? From either a bud tender perspective or a store manager perspective, all up and down the supply chain too. Talk about the emphasis on that as retailers and dispensaries get off the ground. Like how important is that? And then how would you think about like getting those people in the door?
But retail is simple in concept. right? Like at the end of the day, you have customers come in, they make a purchase and they leave. It is so difficult in execution, and it's really difficult in execution because we put a lot of trust in the team that we work with. We have to make that same kind of consideration and care when hiring and bringing on a team to support the business. So when we often see retailers open up, they have a tendency to leave hiring until very last minute. Or that we like overhire way too early when we don't have all of our steps in play and we start to lose traction with the team. So at any given time, we're going to be 3 weeks away from making a great hire. They ultimately probably need to leave about 2 weeks notice, and we're about a week if we turn around our interviewing process really quickly. So at minimum, we need 3 weeks as a consideration, as a timeline. But what we want to think about is how much time and effort we're going to invest in the people that we're bringing on board. So let's say that we have a bud tender who gets hired on, and they're going to do 2 or 3 days of product knowledge training, and then 1 or 2 days of maybe brand and soft skill training, and then we're going to let them loose in store. If we've even only invested that much time, depending on who is working with them, we see the usual spend in terms of opportunity costs on hiring of bud tenders anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000. So when there's somebody sitting in front of you as an interview, we need to sit there and be like, do I trust that this person is going to generate the business that I need them to? And would I put $5,000 or $10,000 in their hands for my business? If the answer is no, it's probably not the right hire. If the answer is yes, then like, let's do it. But bud tender and bud tender turnover is incredibly impactful in this industry. We usually see about 1/3 of bud tenders turnover in the first like 3 months of starting in a role. And that's because of what has happened in the interview process. So it's like getting on the same page with what the expectations are and being really curated with the people that are going to represent your company.
Can I ask you a question that often does come up? Is it like, if you had a Venn diagram, is like product knowledge around cannabis and like expert retail staff person, like, is it ideally a little bit of both, or is like one more heavily weighted?
Ideally, it's going to be a little bit of both because it's going to help you scale faster. But product knowledge can be learned. Soft skills around how to interact with customers is not as easily learned and or doesn't become like muscle memory behavior for a long time. So if you can hire for soft skills and customer interaction first, we can often train product knowledge. When it comes to building the training program, though, we're going to want to start with product knowledge and then work on what our soft skills are going to be in the environment so that we can build on and do role play that includes things that we acknowledge from our product knowledge training.
Yeah. And this, so we've gone through quality of sale, inventory, people, and now to marketing, which is plays into all of these things, I think.
Huge bucket.
Huge bucket, but also one that is not like you're opening a coffee shop now, go market it. Like in some places, you know, we're going to hear about different regulations in different places coming up on the panel, but like, you know, it's not always the same. How do you think about marketing as a cannabis retailer dispensary, especially in a new market?
Marketing is a massive bucket. And so there are a couple main areas that we need to think about. It's like, where are customers going to hear about us first? And then how are we going to communicate again with our customers? We've seen in new markets as they've opened up in both the US as well as in Canada, a huge missed opportunity in waiting and saying, in 6 months' time, I'll start to build up my email database. Don't do it. Start on day one. Because we know that it's going to be customer repurchasing rates that are going to be really impactful for if you can run a profitable business or not. So it's not just about getting the new customers. The customers are going to find us because of the effort that we put into SEO, physical presence, any kind of like PR and advertising that we can do within the regulatory framework. But our most efficient use of resources usually comes from our ability to reconnect with our customer and draw them back in for repurchasing. That is the gold. So from the day one that you open, make sure that you're taking down contact information for your customers, whether you have a loyalty program that day or not, so that you can in the future have a database of people that you can reach out to bring them back into store or communicate about the things that you are doing in store.
Krista, that is super expert. I appreciate that. It's a lot of juicy morsels in there that I think
little nuggets.
Little nuggets, but I would
Yeah.
encourage everybody, if you want more than the little nugget, call Krista and her team at Vetrina Group, because this is just the nugget, but they have done amazing work with retailers here in Canada, in the States, and other markets. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a partner of this program, and thank you for sharing the nuggets with us today, as well as we talk about the tri-state area.
Thanks, Jay. We'll be hanging out in the chat. So if you have questions that you want to go over today, we're happy to talk about them today too.
Great. See, I'm going to try to point. I don't even know which way I'm pointing, but it's in the chat on the side. You'll see it. All right. Thanks, Krista.
Okay. Thanks, Jay.
Now, our panel. So first of all, thank you, Krista, as always, super insightful. Now on to our panel. We will be joined by 3 expert speakers and 1 expert moderator. Our first speaker is Dr. Lucas McCann. He is the co-founder and chief scientific officer at CannDelta, where he provides scientific oversight on all projects. A medicinal organic chemist by training, Lucas acquired regulatory knowledge within the regulatory and operations enforcement branch of Health Canada before leaving the public sector and moving into the consulting space. He specializes in providing business and scientific strategy to frontier companies in the pharmaceuticals, food, cannabis, and controlled drugs and substances fields. He regularly guides clients through regulatory frameworks and assists with improving operational efficiency at licensed sites, including cannabis retailers, in this case in Canada, New York, New Jersey, and most recently, New Mexico. He'll be joined by Korin Neff. She is the founder and CEO of B Cubed Cannabis. She is the former chief compliance officer of a global Fortune 500 company, former in-house counsel at a Fortune 100 company, and a New York City litigator. She is intent on doing things the right way, which helps in the cannabis sector. And as a chief executive officer of a retail and distribution business, she's never far from her list of things to do, as she understands the discipline needed to get stuff done. She has twice been recognized by the Ethisphere as an attorney who matters, received the NJ Business Corporate Compliance Professional of the Year Award, and was designated by the New Jersey Law Journal as a new leader of the bar in their 40 under 40 list. She holds a BA from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, where she was a classmate of mine, although she had a much higher GPA than I did and graduated way ahead of the class than I did. But she also has a JD from the American University Washington College of Law. Lucas and Korin will be joined by Andrew Glassman. He's the co-chair of the Business Organizations and Finance practice at Pullman and Comley in Connecticut. His practice includes corporate law and commercial transactions. Now, what's really relevant in 2015, Andy was appointed by Connecticut Governor Dannell Malloy to serve as a member of the Commission on Connecticut's Leadership in Corporation and Business Law, a delegation charged with developing and recommending policies to attract, encourage, and retain businesses in Connecticut. And that expertise in attracting those businesses translates well into the emerging cannabis industry in that state. The moderator for today is Rebecca Warner of Leafly. She is the Senior Vice President of Sales, overseeing the ongoing value creation of brands and retailers that want to reach shoppers on the Leafly platform. Rebecca brings more than 14 years of experience designing and executing sales growth strategies at industry-leading online marketplaces. Specifically, before joining Leafly, she served as the Director of Rental Sales at Zillow, where she oversaw significant market share growth even through the pandemic. And prior to Zillow, she held director-level roles at Domain, a leading real estate marketplace in Australia. So, without further my voice, Rebecca, Lucas, Andrew, and Korin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jay. So let's start off. What is the timeline for regulations and policies related to adult use recreational cannabis in your respective states? Korin, given New Jersey just went recreational last week, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so we are happy to be the first in the tri-state area to have recreational sales. So as of 4/21, we went live. The state allowed for 13 licenses to be provided to existing alternative treatment centers. So it was entities that were already selling in the medicinal market were allowed to sell in rec. So 12 of those stores were opened. And, you know, to not anybody's surprise, there were long lines, but supposedly it was, you know, pretty well maintained. So I think, you know, with that, the other states are probably not far behind us in trying to make sure that they're opening up their rec markets.
Absolutely. And Lucas, what about New York?
Well, New York is coming in certainly full speed ahead. It's not quite as advanced as state of New Jersey, but it is moving full speed ahead in hopes of creating, I think, one of the most inclusive adult use cannabis industries in the nation. It's done a great job on its social equity program, which we surely have a chance to speak to in a moment. The challenge there is that the regulations are still in sort of the proposal stage. So we're looking at having applications be available shortly in the summer, and then hopefully as soon as we're thinking end of summer, early fall, we should start to see some of those stores open up. So certainly a little bit behind New Jersey, but coming in strong and fast with a lot of motivated folks on the Cannabis Control Board.
Great. And Andrew, can you speak to the timelines in Connecticut?
Yeah, the Connecticut legislature did something a little different than most states do. What they did is they suggested that the Department of Consumer Protection, which is the regulatory body, didn't have to come out with regulations in order to advance the program. So they've set up a lottery system here in Connecticut. The first lottery applications for what we're calling retail, which is the dispensary process, will be due on May 3rd, followed by weekly due dates coming up for each of the other categories, micro cultivation, et cetera, et cetera. We also have some conversion applications, which are also in process. So nobody's waiting for the regulations to come out. What they've done is the DCP issued what we're calling guidance. We don't know what that is. We don't know if that's regulation, but it's not slowing down the process. So by the end of May and beginning of June, we will have applications and lotteries all submitted, and they'll start rolling out the winners of that program.
Great. And Andrew, while I've got you, what are the foreseeable or unforeseeable roadblocks impeding that timeline? It certainly seems like it's coming up quickly.
Well, the one thing that we don't know is we have this very significant overlay of what we're calling the Social Equity Council here in Connecticut, and I know we're going to get to these questions later, but the process by which the Social Equity Council approves individuals as certified social equity applicants may delay the process, but they seem to have themselves pretty well organized. And then we go into a provisional license phase for 14 months with the award of final licenses after that period. So even though we may have winners and losers, we're not going to have a industry that's active and processing really probably until sometime well into 2023, other than possibly those existing medical dispensaries and medical cultivators who will have converted and be supplying to the market.
And do you see Connecticut moving to allowing those medical operators to sell recreational use sooner, like they have done in New Jersey?
Yeah, the answer is they're going to be the first ones out of the block with production and capacity and a wholesale to retail model that will be up and running while others are building out their infrastructure and their operations.
Okay, great. And Andrew, going back around the circle, what about New York? What are the foreseeable or potentially unforeseeable roadblocks impeding the current timelines?
Well, speaking to some of the hurdles that we certainly have there, it's that the regulations for dispensaries are still in the proposal state until next month. So that's certainly going to be a challenge. But further to that point, you have to have cannabis grown and produced and manufactured before the sale of that cannabis can occur. A lot of the cannabis that will be grown, if not all of it, is going to be largely done in outdoor style, outdoor cultivators, which will be effectively and are now hemp farms that have converted. So with the Farmers First program in New York State, the adult use conditional cultivator licenses have gone to the small hemp farmers around New York State. Applications have been on a rolling basis. The OCM has received about 150 applications so far. 52 of those were approved just in April. So very exciting that there are now actual licensed cultivators in the state of New York. And with that Farmers First program, again, it's really giving priority to those that are already established in New York. Have been running a business in New York. Before that, that licensing system sort of opens up to the folks that are out of state that are looking to come in and operate in New York State. So having said that, that's certainly going to be a hurdle, but considering the size there and the motivation from folks, so Kathy Hochul is definitely a very big proponent for this, as well as the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, has even been on Colbert, handing Colbert rollies and legal cannabis live on air, which is very exciting to see. And with that, there are certainly a lot of programs and funding that these small businesses will be able to unlock and apply for as part of that process. So even though the tentative timelines of late summer, early fall are seemingly a little bit ambitious, there does seem to be a lot of motivation to make sure that those targets are hit.
Fantastic. It is great to see the support coming from New York for those new small businesses. I want to pivot just quickly, and Korin, this might be a good one for you. With medical operators allowed to go first in New York and New Jersey, does this give unfair advantages to the medical providers, some of which are MSOs or larger companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big question. It's obviously a hot button issue in New Jersey in particular. So while these existing, MSOs have already been provided the opportunity to sell rec cannabis, there have also been 68 additional rec licenses that have been awarded on a conditional basis for manufacturing and cultivation. So I think what New Jersey is trying to do is trying to make up for the fact that they recognize that there is this advantage being provided to the MSOs by trying to quickly provide these additional licenses, and the reviews are going to be done in a round robin fashion. So if you're seeking a conditional license, which is more of this temporary license that you can transition to annual, you'll get priority review. Then on top of that, if you're a social equity applicant, you get reviewed first. Then if you're a minority women business or disabled veteran, you get reviewed second, and then it goes down to whether you're in an impact zone, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know that there's a perfect solution to get a system open and operating that already exists today. But what I think the state is trying to do is balance the equities as best they can by providing advantages to disadvantaged groups to be first in the rec market behind those existing ATCs.
Okay, fantastic. And then I'd love to hear from you, Korin. We've obviously seen these 13 stores that are being able to sell recreational use cannabis. Do you see any roadblocks, foreseeable or unforeseeable roadblocks in the rest of those conditional licenses being approved?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is just the way the system is set up, right? So I think that Lucas and Andrew will probably echo some of these sentiments. I mean, if you're an existing well-funded entity, it might be challenging to get through just the lengthy process of any governmental review to get a license. But beyond that, the challenges in the capital markets, being able to secure real estate in an ultra competitive market. I mean, those are some of the real practical issues that individuals are facing, especially those that are transitioning from the legacy market into this adult use market in New Jersey and elsewhere.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that and seen that in other states as well. Andrew, I'd like to come back to you. Do you believe there's pressure to move quickly based on New Jersey moving forward first?
I really don't see that happening. Connecticut was up and running as a medical state relatively early, and they frankly have taken their time. It has taken its time, the regulators, in moving to a recreational program when every state around us, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, they've all looked at and some have implemented these rec programs. And Connecticut is known as the land of steady habits. And I think we're sort of conforming to that approach, where when they were ready to roll out a program, they rolled out a program. And they studied a bunch of models and they decided what they wanted to follow. And it's been a very thoughtful program. It's not without its issues. None of these programs are without their issues. But I don't think that that anybody at the state level is in a rush to get out first, as opposed to in a rush to get it right.
And Lucas, what about New York? With New Jersey going live last Thursday, it's certainly been a hot topic about people crossing the border to shop. Do you think there's pressure on New York to move quickly now?
Yeah, there's certainly pressure. I mean, New York State is one that does move at its own pace and ensures that it's moving in the correct direction, I think, before executing on those steps. So on March 10th, the New York State Cannabis Control Board released those proposed regulations for the conditional use adult use dispensaries. And what we saw in those is very strong emphasis on involving justice involved applicants in that entire process as well. So social equity is I think a very important thread that's been woven into the fabric of legalization and I guess regulation of adult use or recreational non-medical cannabis for the state. So again, that's going to involve folks that have been impacted or are what we call justice involved applicants, right? That are going to have either themselves have been charged with an offense or someone in their family member that they're directly related to. And priority is going to be certainly awarded to those folks under conditional licenses, which they'll be allowed to convert to regular licenses. And in addition to that, we've certainly seen a large amount of funding being poured into this. So I mentioned very quickly the Seeding Opportunity Initiative that was brought into play by Kathy Hochul. So that's $200 million social equity cannabis investment fund that's going to be available again to those justice involved candidates, right? And New York farmers again and other small businesses are going to serve as a foundation for this new legal cannabis market. In addition to what we have at the state level funding, Eric Adams is again pouring another close to $5 million into the initiative as well. And they're looking at having cannabis being grown on the rooftops in public housing, and $5 million going into that, I think is going to serve as a very strong catalyst to move this forward, propel it forward very, very quickly.
Fantastic. And while we're speaking about social equity and social justice, it would be great to hear, I mean, I know you shared some there, Lucas, but going into that in a little bit more detail about particularly New York's approach to licensing cannabis retail.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're looking at really bringing in those that are justice involved. And when we say justice involved, we mean those that have been have pled guilty to an offense or been convicted of a cannabis related offense prior to last year. So those folks are going to be again prioritized in this application. So they'll need to have more than 50% control over the businesses that are being prioritized for these application reviews. Okay, and in addition to that, they have to also show that they've got competency at running a business. So they're looking, the Cannabis Control Board is looking to see that these folks have at least had a 10% stake of ownership in a business for the last 2 years, and that business has also been profitable. So that, from a certain sense, that could be a bit of a critique here, that we're taking a very sort of narrow amount of folks that would be eligible for those applications, again, that are already marginalized folks, and then adding additional criteria. So the piece of the pie for eligible applicants is potentially becoming smaller. Once those folks are up and running and licensed, they can certainly apply for the standard, more permanent license. They'll have a couple of years to do so. And throughout that process, the Cannabis Control Board will evaluate their compliance to the regulations and ensuring that they've been operating as they should be. In addition to those justice involved individuals, there are nonprofits that have been serving those justice involved individuals, as well as the communities that those folks might have been sort of more, I guess, sort of unfairly targeted. So those communities, those geographical locations, and also folks that have a history of creating opportunities for justice involved individuals. Having justice involved individuals on its board or officers will also be considered. And again, those alternative applicants will have to have a number of employees as well. So a little bit limiting, but again, I think it's a very strong social equity program that's being woven into this, and this will, again, will be implemented, reviewed, and approved, these licenses, well before we have those multi-state operators coming into the space. So again, in conclusion, New York's recent steps regarding conditional cannabis licenses really should help the state catch up with New Jersey and Connecticut for the adult use cannabis, which we're hoping will be sold sometime this year.
Let's hope so. I'd love, it's Korin, you mentioned a little bit about the social justice licenses. There were 68, I believe, conditional approved. Can you speak more to how social equity and social justice is really playing a role in the approach to licensing cannabis in New Jersey?
Yeah, so I think New Jersey's taken a bit of a different tactic in terms of being a little bit more broad brushed. And then, as I mentioned, providing these different levels of prioritization based upon the criteria that you fit in. And I think the conventional wisdom that went into that was which of these groups, everybody was proportionately or disproportionately impacted by this war on drugs, but which groups were more impacted and how can we create favor among those groups in terms of prioritizing review. What I think is a little bit unique with respect to New Jersey is that on top of the state creating all of these criteria and having its regulations that have been released, the municipalities, like many other states, had the opportunity to opt out, but also have the opportunity to create additional, I'll call it barriers, but in a positive way, barriers to entry. So for example, in some municipalities, in order to even be awarded or the municipality to indicate that a particular owner is entitled to even go to the next step of getting applying for a license with the state, they have to be either a minority or a woman-owned business or be a social equity business. So any of these social impact groups, they have to meet those criteria. So I think that that's a little bit of a different spin in that municipalities are showing their muscle and the importance that they put behind these initiatives as well.
And there are a lot of municipalities in New Jersey that are supporting that are coming out with these unique requirements.
Yeah, there are, and it's been very competitive in that regard, which again is a really nice thing to see. But that has to be balanced out by businesses supporting other businesses and ensuring that these social equity applicants again have the capital, have the training, and the manpower to be able to submit the applications, and then obviously, again, to be able to run a successful business afterwards. So I think that the state is putting and the municipalities are putting some of those things in place. And I think it becomes up to the rest of us also to support those businesses.
Fantastic. And Andrew, last over to you. I'd love to hear from you about Connecticut and the social justice and social equity, the approach to social justice and social equity and how that's playing a role in the approach to licensing cannabis retail.
So what's interesting is listening to the other two, because yet again, we're a little different than New York and New Jersey in their approach. On the issue of social justice and those who have been impacted by the war on drugs, we do have a process for expungement of records associated with convictions related to possession and distribution and other minor offenses, non-violent offenses. So that is part of our legislation. And our view, or the legislature's view in Connecticut, was very different in that they did not focus on race, ethnicity, or gender. What they focused on in the passage of the legislation was the urban areas, the urban centers, which they've identified as disproportionately impacted based on economics and unemployment rates. So the view obviously is that if you focus on the urban centers, you're going to heighten the probability of those minorities and those impacted getting into the process because of just the percentages that live in those cities and the surrounding also impacted areas that qualify. So it's based on the household income, and it's based on where you lived, based on the census tract and the variability of, or the variable of unemployment impact in those neighborhoods, and some conviction aspects as well. So it's a calculus. There's a map in the state of Connecticut that says these are the disadvantaged neighborhoods, the disproportionately impacted areas. If you lived in these neighborhoods and your income was below 3 times the median household income in the state of Connecticut, you qualify as a disproportionately impacted resident and therefore a social equity applicant, and you are eligible to apply for a license. And through the licensure process, they've prioritized social equity applicants. So we have not drawn a distinction between MSOs or other capital partners, but what they've created is a system where if you go through the lottery system, which is happening next week, 10 days, the priority is for the social equity applicants first. They get 50% of the available licenses in each category. And they have to own 65% or more of each applicant. So if you're an individual going in as a social equity applicant, you're good. If you're part of a joint venture, you have to own at least 65% of that joint venture, and you have to be in control of that joint venture. So the economics and the management are associated with the control litmus test, if you will. At the same time, they'll allow MSOs to back individual SEAs, as we call them. And those MSOs can come in as long as they adhere to the structure that was just identified in this statute. Again, the existing cultivators are incentivized to partner on a joint venture basis with cultivators and dispensers with individual SEAs, and those can be 50-50 joint ventures. And if you're a 50-50 joint venture, the SEA is required to own that joint venture or that 50% interest for no less than 7 years. If you go in through the lottery system, that SEA is required to own 65% or more of that successful applicant for no less than 3 years. So we're not focusing on capability of an understanding of the industry. And frankly, in 2012, when we had the medical business, everybody in the state of Connecticut was a neophyte when it came to growing and cultivating and distributing at retail cannabis. So I think the state took the position, why should it be any different now? These people can go out and hire all the consultants and all of the individuals they need to educate them on how to stand up their business and develop a sound business plan and move forward and execute on that plan. So the state is agnostic as to where your capital comes from, as long as the social equity applicant owns and controls that operation. And then second lottery is for the non-social equity applicants. So I think they've tried to create an incentive system. So using a carrot, not a stick, not prohibiting, but encouraging, and then incentivizing people to get discounted fees, those who are converting. So there's a lot of incentive built into the system here in Connecticut. And the hope is that we positively impact these disproportionately impacted communities and help the social equity applicant.
It's fantastic to hear such 3 different approaches from the tri-state area in terms of social equity and social justice. I'd love to know from all 3 of you, what lessons learned from other jurisdictions seem most important to the elected officials and regulators in your state? And Korin, if you'd like to start off.
Yeah, I think New Jersey is interesting again in that they promulgated their regulations and released them as temporary regulations in August of last year, but then gave themselves a year to go ahead and adopt them as permanent regulations or alter or amend them otherwise. So I think what New Jersey was saying is, hey, in putting together our regulations, we learned from every other state that's come before us, but we also want to learn from ourselves. So I really think that that's a bit of a unique approach, and that they knew that what they didn't know was going to then need to be addressed in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. And Lucas, can you comment on New York?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of areas for improvement, I think, with what they currently have in New York, although I do see it as a shining example of what a social equity program could look like. There are some folks that are not included in their proposed sort of social equity program. So there is a strong emphasis on justice involved or justice impacted individuals, which doesn't necessarily speak directly to a clause on diversity and inclusion there for typically marginalized communities or impact zones. So that wasn't necessarily baked in. I mean, there are some folks that maybe were not necessarily just as involved that are still sort of representative of those communities that can't necessarily participate in the same way in this application process. And I think that's lacking. From what New Jersey has done, I think New Jersey has an extremely thorough application packages, particularly as it pertains to those that are in the cultivation space, where they're looking to evaluate all the standard operating procedures. And I don't understand how those folks have not just the bandwidth, but also the expertise to review those with the same level of competency that would sort of be required, I guess, to, you know, issue a license, for instance. So happy to see that, you know, that yet hasn't been sort of a necessary criteria, and that folks just have to be a hemp farmer with the Department of Agriculture. And then one particular lesson learned there that you know, I would like to see sort of involved in New York is actually pertaining to, for example, packaging and labeling. You know, I think we need to see some important guidelines and standards there. There is certainly an ongoing concerns in Colorado and California where we see many packages sort of be confused with non-infused products, and there have been, I think, a history of underage individuals consuming those products without maybe even necessarily realizing that they were infused products. So seeing some lessons learned there from other more pioneer states as it is in the legalization framework would be fantastic. And yeah, I guess there's still a lot to see, so we'll have to wait and sort of see how this whole thing rolls out after the regulations for dispensaries are approved next month.
Terrific. And Andrew, what about you? Any takeaways from Connecticut?
Sure. So if you can picture the state of Connecticut geography, we are bordered, really more than 1/3 of our border is shared with Massachusetts to the north and to the east. New York is to our west. We have Long Island to our south, and a little tiny corner of the east below, sort of near Long Island, is Rhode Island. And so we're most impacted by what's going on in Massachusetts. And there's a lot of cross-border activity between Massachusetts and Connecticut as far as consuming products. And there was a lot of attention paid to what Massachusetts did with respect to the social equity piece. I think people were disappointed how it first rolled out. It was more of a straw man approach in Massachusetts, and I think Massachusetts is now rectifying it. And that's why Connecticut has had such a strong emphasis on social equity and the criteria around that and the investment in social equity applicants. So I think that's the biggest lesson and why they took their time rolling out their approach. As far as products and product development, Connecticut took a very conservative approach. For example, we don't have any candy-like products allowed, no gummies. The only edibles that you can have in Connecticut are cookies that are clearly labeled. All of our packaging of product is in prescription style containers, non-tamper containers, and nobody's going to change that. We have some debate going on right now as to advertising and billboarding in Connecticut. There's a move on to eliminate billboarding in the entire state of Connecticut and recognize that this is still a serious drug. It's still a federally classified Schedule I drug. The states are the only ones making a move right now. And we have a very strict drug enforcement process here in Connecticut. And even though it's recreational, it is the drug enforcement process that will control the enforcement on the recreational side, just as if it were a prescription drug being manufactured and distributed. So I think those are the lessons we've learned.
Interesting. And you mentioned the federal government there. Last question for all of you. With New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut joining the legal framework, in your expert opinion, and Andrew, I'll start with you, do you think this will push the federal government to act either on banking legislation or on full legalization in some way?
And you want to start with me? I think the banking is the most likely to soften. We see a lot of activity. It really depends on who's in the White House and who's running the Department of Justice and who controls Congress. And so I think there's clearly a softening even among the more conservative members of Congress who are recognizing that this is an industry here to stay. So, and as opposed to, the question of would they ever decriminalize marijuana? I don't think so. They may deschedule it or reduce the classification to permit it. I think there's still a lot of hesitancy at the federal level, and that is more of a Department of Justice issue that we need to keep our eye on as well.
Lucas, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Andrew on many of those points. I do think that banking will be the next thing to begin the softening process, as well as each state comes online with a statewide regulatory framework that certainly increases and improves the momentum of this for federal legalization. But if we were looking at federal legalization, no quote me on this, but I think we're looking at a time frame of at least 5 to 10 years.
And Korin, any last remarks from you?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be some time before we see federal legalization. I think we're all hopeful that banking, just for pragmatic reasons, is going to go through. So I think, again, that could be a bipartisan issue potentially, if it's viewed the right way, although everything's partisan today.
Wonderful. Well, look, thank you all for your time. It was great to hear from you all this morning, and we'll speak with you soon.
Pleasure, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, Lucas, Korin, and Andrew. And prior to that, thank you, Krista. As always, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the sessions light up where you can join us, share your camera and microphone, and join the conversation. And if you want to network, I will open up the one-on-one networking where you will serendipitously be matched up with another cannabis professional looking to connect in this environment. And finally, we have tons of programming coming up. You can visit our events page on our website, businessofcannabis.com, to find out more. But also, please follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, on our YouTube channel, so you don't miss a thing. Thank you for being here. We will see you in the breakout room, and please check back for all the programming of Business of Cannabis. Again, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Leafly and Vetrina Group. We will see you next month at the Cannabis Retail Series.